Well, Happy New Year. And you probably like, it's already 6-7 days in the new year. Man, you're late. This is the first Sunday of the new year, and I'm one of those guys that probably say Happy New Year for the next 2 or 3 weeks, as long as we're in this series, Resolution, because we're going to talk about the new year. Because you know the new year, you know what it's really all about. And I'm a gym goer, and I don't know if you do that. I was going to the gym before the new year, by the way. But I noticed in the month of December, I could go into the gym, and I could go to any piece of equipment I wanted to and use it anytime I wanted to. And then January 1st came, and I didn't go on January 1st. I went on January 2nd, and I got there that morning, and I was like, oh, wait a minute. The parking lot was full. I get there at 5 in the morning. It was full. And there was a line at the door waiting to get in, and that was a cold morning too, by the way. And I was like, what? And I looked around, and there was all these people there that I didn't recognize. And I remember when I went in to scan my little code to get in, the girl at the desk like, hey, Happy New Year. And I was like, do we have like a lot of people sign up? And she goes, no, these people have been members for years. They just don't come but a couple weeks of the year, and that's January. You know how it is. And some of you guys are like, yeah, I've been that person before. And I won't even begin to ask, like, how many of you guys got gym memberships and you just don't go? I don't want to know that. Been there, done that. I'm trying not to do that anymore. But isn't that what the New Year's all about? In fact, you see all these ads now for eating healthy. There's probably been a lot of Weight Watchers ads or whatever they call themselves these days, and Slim Fast and Planet Fitness and all the rest of these ads, because the New Year's is about self-improvement, isn't it? It's about a new you, isn't it? I mean, are you with? In fact, here's what we know. Gym memberships at an all-time high in January because people make their resolutions. And then the other place that you usually see a lot more people, and maybe it's true of you today, and I hope not, it's just not January and that's why you're here, but churches actually do better in January than any other time of the year because people are like hey, I'm going to start this year off right. I'm going to go to church at least for a couple weeks, and then we're going to stop that stuff. But hopefully you'll go because it's the right thing to do for you, not just because, well, you ought to do it. But when we get to New Year's, what we understand is New Year's is about self-improvement. And often what we do is we want to make ourselves new. And that's a good thing. And so we go to the gym because we know we put on some pounds and we want to take the pounds off. We want to get healthier. And so we get these thoughts like, I'm going to eat better this year, and I'm going to start working out, and I'm going to try and get back into clothes that I've got hanging in my closet that I haven't been able to wear in a long time. Can I get an amen to that one? Yeah. And then we said all kinds of we want to be better, right? Because we think like, and some of them are good things, and I don't want to make anything sound bad. Some of us, we make these resolutions out like, hey, I'm going to start being wise with how I spend my money. I'm not going to burn it so much on stupid things. I'm going to be wise. I'm going to start saving money. I'm going to get out of debt. And we make those kind of, maybe we watch Dave Ramsey a little too much. We got those kind of resolutions. And we do these things, and what we do is we focus on how can I be better? And really, when we get into the season of self-improvement, what we ask is, what should I do about me? That's the question that we ask this time of year. And that's a good question to ask. It's not a bad question necessarily. But what we're asking is, how do I make me a better version of me? And that means sometimes we're going to ask questions like, hey, should I read my Bible more? Yes. Should I go to church more? Yes, those are good things. Should I get out of debt? Absolutely. Should I lose weight? Absolutely. I think everybody should lose some weight this year. We should all get out of debt. Those are good things. But I want you to know there's a better question that we should be asking ourselves this year. And that's what this series is about. In fact, this question you aren't prepared probably to answer it today. And so when I ask this question, I don't want you coming right up with an answer. In fact, if you do, you've missed the whole point because you haven't really given it any thought. Because it's a very important question, and it's a question that really is going to cause probably some strife in your marriages if you answered it and you actually follow up in doing it. Because it's going to make us nervous. It's going to cause us to be a little bit scared about what the answer might be. And it might cause us to have some intrepidation because we think about the answer to it and then we go, I don't think I can do this. But it's a question that we really need to answer. And it's a better question. And it all begins with an Old Testament character, a guy that we're going to talk about today in the book of Nehemiah. And let me give you, before we look into it, now if you have your Bibles and you want to start there, you can turn to the book of Nehemiah. It might take you a while to find it because it's one of those Old Testament books you don't probably go to very often. But Nehemiah, just so you understand what we're going to deal with here in Nehemiah is what we call a post-exilic, and these are fancy words, I know, I'll explain them in a minute. He's a post-exilic writer, okay? And what that means is there was an exile, a Jewish exile. So what we find here is about the year 605 BC, this guy named Nebuchadnezzar came and he defeated Jerusalem. He defeated Judah, which was the southern half of Israel, and he sent them off into captivity. Now, the northern half, Israel, the 10 tribes up north, had already been put into captivity 100 or so years before that by Assyria. And so all of Israel is taken over by the Babylonians. And Babylonians, you remember, probably if you grew up around church or you heard stories, you know about Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, Daniel, and the lion's den. All those guys were guys who, they started off in Israel, in Judah, and got taken out of the country and sent to Babylon. That was part of this exile. And so that happened about 605 BC. And then about 70 years of the Babylonians in their captivity, what happens is there's a very few remnant people left in Jerusalem, and basically all of Israel, all of Judah, all of Jerusalem comes to a halt, comes to a stop. They just shut down because they didn't have any good government there. They were left with straggling people who were defeated. The walls were torn down. The temple was destroyed, so there's no temple worship going on. There's nothing good. Everybody's in sad state here. And what happens is after those 70 years, the Persians come in, and the Persians defeat the Babylonians, and they take over. And they have this ruler named Cyrus. In fact, he calls himself, and I don't know if he was, but his name is Cyrus the Great. I don't know what was great about him other than he was a pretty big ruler. But God put it in Cyrus's heart to look at his empire, and Cyrus makes this survey of the empire, and he realizes he has all these Jewish people that the Babylonians had taken out of their land, and they were spread out all over his empire. And Cyrus says, you know what? I'm making a decree, I'm making a law that if you were taken from your homeland, if you were taken from your home city where you were originally from, and maybe you were even born here, you can go back. It's okay. You can go back. I'm letting everybody go back. Because, of course, that was God behind that, allowing him to do that. And so that seemed to be such a good thing. But things aren't that good because during this time period, the economy in Israel had failed. Because there's nobody there. They burned everything, torn everything down. And the walls are gone because there's no protection, no security. There's no government structure. So the economy is stalled. And there are other people now, other foreign governments now that are involved in Jerusalem. And they've moved in and they've sort of taken over. And the people are in a lot of disregard. And about 90 years later, after all this has happened, about 90 years later, we're introduced in the Bible to this guy named Nehemiah. And Nehemiah, he's a servant, he's a slave. And there's not a whole lot we know about Nehemiah from his previous history, but here's what I would say. If you think about Nehemiah, he's a servant to the king of Persia, this guy named Artaxerxes, who's the king of Persia, and he's been a slave for most of his life, servant. And he's in good shape because he's being treated well, but we're not even sure he's ever been to Israel. We're not even sure he's been to Judah. It's most likely that he was born in captivity, and he's probably never even visited Jerusalem, but he's got a burden for this Jerusalem because it's his homeland. And it's about this time that he sits down and he pens out his story, which we find in the Old Testament in the book that's named after him, Nehemiah. And this is his story. And we're going to do something today. I don't usually read an entire chapter, but we're going to read the entire chapter 1. It's only 11 verses, so don't get freaked out on me. But it has an important truth in it, okay? So if you have your Bibles, we're in Nehemiah chapter 1, beginning in verse number 1. The Bible says, the words of Nehemiah, son of Hakaliah. Now, he's just making sure you understand who he is. It says, in the month of Kislev, in the 20th year, and that's important to us because for those of you that thought maybe the Bible is full of fairy tales or once upon a time Disney stories, this isn't a Disney story. This is a true story. This is a real person. He's giving you a real time of year, the real month, everything. He says, in the month of Kislev, in the 20th year, while I was in the citadel of Susa. Susa was the place of the headquarters for the king of Persia at this time, great province. They ruled the known world at the time. And so he says, while I was in the citadel of Susa, Hanani, one of my brothers, that is fellow countrymen, not necessarily relative, but one of my fellow Jewish members, came from Judah with some other men. And he came here to say this, and I questioned them about the Jewish remnant that had survived the exile. Now, that's something there. When Babylon came in, they took the best of the best. They took the brightest, the most important people. They took people who could benefit them, and they pulled all the good people out. And that's why we see Daniel and all of his friends were pulled over to Babylon. They were there to serve the king, but they left the people who didn't finish first grade. They left the people who had problems, the handicaps. They left the people who brought them no good luck. They left the people who were old and had no hope. They left the people who couldn't take care of themselves. And so you see this is so bad. And Hananiah, he's explaining things. And Nehemiah says, hey, I want to know, tell me about the people who survived the exile. And some of that includes those people who've gone back now. The people that Cyrus said they could go back. And then he says, and also about Jerusalem. Verse 3 says, they said to me, those who survived the exile, they didn't thrive, they're back in the province, are in great trouble and disgrace. And isn't that important to see that? Things aren't good. That's what I told you already. Things are bad. They're in great trouble and disgrace. He keeps going. He says, the wall of Jerusalem. Now, the wall of Jerusalem, the wall of any city was so important because that's the defenses. That kept the bad guys out, the good guys in. He says, the wall of Jerusalem is broken down. No one's fixed it. No one's done anything. And its gates have been burned with fire. And you know basically what he's saying here? Jerusalem is a joke. It's not going to be on the top 10 places in the world to live. It's not going to be a nice place. It's scary because anybody who wants to can walk right in there and take anything you have. And pretty much the people there, they don't have any way of defending themselves anyway. So he paints this bad picture. And notice in verse 4 what he says in response. He says, when I heard these things, when he heard these things, I sat down and wept. Now, I thought that was strange when you sit back and you think about what I've said about Nehemiah. We don't even know that Nehemiah has ever even been to Jerusalem. He's even been to Israel. But these things burdened him so much, they broke his heart, that he sat down and he wept. He didn't have time to sit down. He's a servant. But he sat down and wept. And it says, for some days, this wasn't a one-time deal. See, I imagine if it was you or me, and somebody came to us and told us how bad things were out, say, brother, I'll pray for you. Isn't that the Christian response thing? I'll pray for you. And then you probably don't. And in your mind, you're thinking, so sad for them. Too bad I'm not there, huh? See ya. Wouldn't want to be ya. Isn't that how we sort of act in life? Nehemiah's not doing that. He says, for some days, I sat down right then when I heard it and sat down and wept, but for some days, I mourned. I mourned. That's a word for death, right? I mourned and fasted and prayed. Man, fasted. That's some serious stuff there. Fasting's not just about giving up food. Fasting's about giving up whatever keeps me from holding back to God. He says, I fasted and prayed before the God of heaven for some days. It wasn't just a one-time thing. And he says, I didn't do it for the show. I didn't do it for other people. I did it for the God of heaven. Verse 5, he goes on to say, then I said, notice this is so incredible because he records the prayer that he gives to God. This is a prayer he's prayed for some days. He says, Lord, the God of heaven, the great and awesome God. And notice what he says after this, who keeps his covenant. Notice how he describes God. Now, to you and to I, yeah, we've probably grown up around it. We might have even heard it in Sunday school about covenants and stuff like that. It didn't mean, went over our head. But to a Jewish man, this meant everything. And he's reminding us of who God is, and he's reminding God of who he is. And he said, God, you're the God who made that first covenant way back in Genesis chapter 3, verse 15 with Adam and Eve and said, you know what? The seed of the woman will bruise the seed of that serpent, Satan, and defeat him and crush him. It's the same God who made a covenant with Noah as he went into the ark and said, I'm going to save the world through you. It's the same God who came along to Abraham and said, Abraham, I'm going to make a covenant to bless you. And out of you, all the people of the earth will be blessed. It's the same covenant he made with Moses and the people of Israel as they were there at Mount Sinai. And he said, hey, if you keep my commandments, you do what I tell you to do, then I'm going to bless you. I'm going to give you a land that I promised you, and you're going to be my people, and I'm going to be your God. And he says, hey, you're the God who keeps his covenant of love. You are that God. of love with those who love him and keep his commandments. And he reminds them of this. And then in verse 6 he goes on, but let your ear be attentive and your eyes be open to the prayer of your servant is praying before you. And he goes on to say, day and night for your servants, the people of Israel. And then he says, I confess. This is so strange. He records this. He says, I confess the sins we Israelites. And he stops there. And in case you were thinking like he's praying one of those prayers about a nation sort of excluding himself, he says, I confess the sins we Israelites. And then he pauses and says, including me, including myself. Wow. He says, I include myself, and I include my father's family. That's pretty tough to call out your own family. He says, I am confessing the sins that we have committed against you. And he reminds himself of that covenant that God said, hey, if you're my people and you follow my plans, then I will bless you and I will give you the promised land and you'll be my people. But if you don't do that, you know what's going to happen? I'm going to take you out of the land and you're going to become a byword. And the things, the way they are now, that's what you get promised. He goes on. He says, we have acted. He's being just so transparent there. He says, we have acted very wickedly towards you. We had an obligation. It was our part of the covenant. See, we were going to be your people, but to be your people, it wasn't just all fun and games. Hey, let me just have what I get. All the blessings. There was an obligation. He says, no, we've acted very wickedly to you. We have not obeyed the commands, the decrees, and laws you gave to your servant Moses. And he pictures that Mount Sinai, where Moses went up there not once but twice to get the laws of God and the explanation that was given there. And he says, verse number 8, something so strange to the omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent God. He says, remember. Like God's going to forget. He says, remember. And then he goes on to quote God, what God said. Isn't that great? In case you didn't remember, God, here it is. Remember the instruction you gave your servant Moses. God, I don't know if your memory's failing you, but here it is. If you are unfaithful, this is God speaking, if you are unfaithful, I will scatter you among the nations. And it's like, this is what happened. God, he's just remembering, and really it's more for him than it is for God. He goes on to say, but if you return to me, and this is the hope he had, but if you return to me and obey my commands, then even if your exiled people are at the farthest horizon, and you know where the farthest horizon would have been? Persia, the capital city of Susa. They weren't next door. They were a long way away. They were a long journey back to Israel. He says, even if you're all the way over there, then I'll bring you back. And that's what he goes on. He says, I will gather them from there and bring them to the place I have chosen for my name, as a dwelling for my name. That would be Israel. That would be Jerusalem more specifically. Verse 10, he says, they are your servants and your people. He's reminding God this, whom you redeemed. And when he says that, that has direct reference right there back to the time when they were in Egypt as slaves for 400 plus years. And he says, you know what, that time that you redeemed them by your great strength, your mighty hand, that time that Moses and Aaron came in and they exhibited the power of God by pronouncing those plagues on Egypt. You remember the plagues? Frogs and blood, darkness and hail, locusts, flies, all those gross things, and it ended up with the death of the firstborn. He says, hey, you redeemed them. I remember through the history of our people how you brought us just like you did, and I want you to do it again. And then he finishes up verse 11. He says this, Lord, he's going to give you why he's praying this prayer. He says, Lord, all the stuff that I just prayed, Lord, let your ear be attentive to the prayer of this, your servant, and to the prayer of your servants who delight in revering your name. And here it is. This is what he asked for. He says, give your servant success today. He's been praying, fasting, and doing this for days now. He says, give your servant success today by granting him favor in the presence of this man. And if you haven't followed what he's doing here, what goes on next is Nehemiah gets up. He reports to his duty. He's the cupbearer to the king, the most powerful man on the planet. And he walks in, and this is his plan. He's going to walk into the throne room of a king that isn't his own nationality. He's going to walk into the presence of a guy who, just by sheer fact that he is a servant, he doesn't have any right to say anything. And he's going to ask the king for time off. He's going to say, hey, king, I need an extended leave. I need to leave your good graces here. I need to leave everything I've got. I need to leave this cushy job. I need to live all the comforts that you've provided for me. I need to leave my family and my friends that are here. I need to leave. I need this extended absence, and I need to go back to a horrible place, a place that's fallen apart, a place that doesn't have any hope. And I need to go back there today. And I need to leave. And what's crazy is you don't ask kings for things like that. I mean, that's why they're kings, right? They're the ones that do the asking. You don't ask them. And here he is. He says, God, and I love the way he phrased that. Did you catch this in verse 11? He doesn't call him, he doesn't say the presence of this king. He says this man. He's so wise in his prayer. He's exalting God to the highest point in his life. And he understands this. And he says, hey, you know what? I know I'm nothing. But this king who thinks he's everything, he's nothing either. And he says, I need success. I need some help here, God. And you're the only person. I can't turn to the king. You control. I understand that the heart of the king is in the hand of God. He says, I understand that. And the only way I get success is by granting favor. But it doesn't come really from you, from him. It comes from you, God. And that's why I'm praying to you. And you know what's crazy here? This is such a huge sacrifice for Nehemiah. Because Nehemiah's heart, though, is broken. And he felt compelled to act on what he heard from his fellow countryman, Hananiah. And the question that we're posing to you today, it's a question I gave, or actually Jerry passed out for me. Everybody got one. The question that we should be asking is not the question, what should I do about me? How should I improve myself? How should I have a better year? Because that's the question that most of us consider. And it's not a bad question. I don't want you to feel bad about that question. But it's a question we've been taught by society to ask about ourselves. And it's so inwardly focused that Christians today have asked it over and over and over again. And that's why churches don't do anything to help their country, their world. We just sit around and complain. But the question I want you to face today is a question that's so difficult to ask. And it's so difficult to be honest with the answer. The question is this: what breaks your heart? What breaks your heart? And that's a question, I know right away you got all these things running through your mind. Some of you have already confronted this question before, maybe not, maybe that same exact question. But the question is, what breaks your heart? And it's a question, if you want to have a great new year, it's a question that will help you. Because this question should be asked when you look around. When you look around at your town, when you look around at your community, when you look around at Seagrove, when you look around at Asheboro, when you look around at Randolph County, when you look around at North Carolina, when you look around at the United States, when you look around at our entire world, when you turn on the news, when you look at the school systems, when you hear the news events that are going on, when you hear about earthquakes in Japan, and planes crashing into each other, and people burning alive in those planes, what breaks your heart? When you hear about human trafficking, when you hear about friends and their families falling apart, when you see kids that are being neglected, what breaks your heart? The problem is so many of us, when we get to this question, we put up our self-defenses. We say things to ourselves. We say things like, hey, you know what? I can't do anything about that. Because it's always been that way. And it's going to always be that way. And I don't have the resources to do it. Nothing's going to change. I don't know anybody. I'm a nobody. Haven't we heard those things in our mind before? Can't do anything about it. It's going to take more than I am. Maybe you said things like, I'm too young. Some of you in here. Or some of you maybe said, I'm too old. I'm too busy. That's the number one excuse. I'm way too busy. Somebody else should do it, but it's important. I'm too busy. Maybe I'm too disconnected. And maybe you've prayed prayers like, hey, God, would you, God, send somebody over there to deal with that? Somebody needs to do something, God. Would you do something about that? Instead of going into this year asking, what can I do about me? How can I make me a better person? What if we ask the question, what needs to be done around me? What needs to be done around me? See, when we answer that question, what needs to be done around me, we see all the truth that happens around us. See, the truth of the matter is, this new year, and this is so important, I want you to get this, if you really want to become a better person, do something this year that would make the world a better place. Did you get that? It's not about you. It's about others. And that's the whole truth about it. See, there's an old Latin proverb that says, what man is a man who does not make the world better? And what a great statement that is. See, here's what I know and you know. The people that you admire the most, the people that you revere, the people that you think about as heroes or really you just admire the most, the people that you will tell your kids and your grandkids about are not the people who went through this year and lost a couple of pounds, went to the gym all year round. Nobody tells people about that. They're not even the people, and that's a good thing, by the way. They're not the people who, hey, you know what? They got out of debt this year. We don't really admire those people that much. That's a good thing, but that's not high on our list. See, the people who inspire us the most are the people who've made the world a better place or have made somebody's world a better place. And that could be you, that could be me. See, if you don't do this, if you don't ask that question, what breaks my heart, and answer it, you know what you're going to do? Let me give you a little insight to what you're going to do, because I've seen this for a long time. I've noticed this happen. See, what your year is going to look like, it's going to look like this. Your year is going to look like, 2024 look like this. You're going to sit around, you're going to look at social media, you're going to look at TV, and you're going to blame everybody. Because that's what we do. We sit around, we blame all the problems, all the things that we break our heart. You didn't do anything, so we start blaming people. That's what people in church do, at least. People blame things. And people who blame things don't change things. Did you get that? People who blame things don't change things. Everybody say that with me. People who blame things don't change things. Hey, come on, say it one more time. People who blame things don't change things. And you know what's happened? That explains Christianity in America today. You know why America is post-Christian? Because people blame things, at least Christian people do. That's what we do. We sit around, we blame the government. But when you blame the government, you know what you don't do? You don't change anything. We blame the Republicans, we blame the Democrats, we blame the president, we blame the governor, we blame everybody and anybody. We blame the LGBTQ plus community, we blame alcoholics, we blame drug abusers, we blame everybody, but we don't change one thing. And today, the world's a worse place because we're a bunch of blamers who sit around in our seats, our pews, blaming everybody. And we don't change a thing. And we become so inwardly focused. And that's so opposite of what Jesus wanted us to be. See, we say things like, hey, somebody needs to do something about this, but we don't do anything about it. And what's going to happen when we blame, you're going to go spend more time and more energy blaming somebody, blaming something for something you don't like. You're going to blame the government. You're going to blame the president. Doesn't matter what he is. You're going to blame, hey, you know what we do? In church world, we blame the church or we blame the preacher. Yeah, that'd be easy to do. We get to the point where we blame our spouse, we blame our kids, we blame the government, we blame policemen. Look at our society, isn't it true? Come on. I know it's harsh to hear this, but the truth of the matter is we sit around and blame things. And as long as you're blaming, nothing ain't changing. That's the truth. Blame, just so you get this, blame is not a strategy for changing anything. Did you hear me? Blame is not a strategy for changing your marriage. Hey, you want to sit there and get into it with your spouse? Play the blame game. You know what's going to happen? You'll be filing for divorce eventually. Do you hear me? This is true. Blame doesn't change anything. It doesn't. Blame just causes more blame, and nothing happens. Blame is actually how we avoid changing things, and that's what the church has done for years now. Oh yeah, how liberal things are. We just point our finger and blame. Blame, 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 blame. No solution, no answer, no, hey, we don't get our hands dirty doing anything. Blame does not change anything. But what if, instead of sitting back watching TV and doing nothing, blaming everybody, what if we actually took all the energy and time this year that you spent or would spend blaming and actually focused it on helping to bring a change in the area that breaks your heart? See, that's something up to this point, what I've said so far is something that applies to everybody, whether you're a Christ follower or not. All those things are true. But let me just point it this far, because I want to move it a little bit higher for us that are Christians, Christ followers. Let me just say this. And when I say Christ followers, I mean people who actually have done their best to follow the commands of Jesus, not to show up in church, but to follow the commands of Jesus and live what he says on a daily basis. Let me say this. People who actively follow Jesus make things better. Do you know that? Because Jesus always makes things better. See, you can't actively, and listen, church, because this is a problem we have, you can't actively follow Jesus and not make people's lives better around you. You can't actively follow Jesus and not make your workplace better. You can't actively follow Jesus and not make Seagrove better. You can't actively follow Jesus and not make Asheboro, Randolph County, North Carolina, the United States better. And so you know what I would say? We have a problem today because there's a lot of non-Christ followers. There's name followers, right? See, to be a Christian, you have to follow things that Jesus did. And Jesus, it would be impossible because what Jesus taught and modeled drives us to that. And let me just talk about two things today real quick that Jesus taught. Number one, Jesus taught that devotion to God is measured in terms of devotion to others. And you say, okay, I get it. No, you don't, because it was so different, and it changed everything. It really did. You see, devotion to God is measured in terms of devotion to others. That was revolutionary back in the first century, still revolutionary today. Jesus came and he broke the temple system. And it wasn't just the temple system in Israel, it was the temple system of all religions. Because basically, here's how religion works, and it still works like this today. Because we have a lot of people that do this. Hey, I'm going to go to the temple, or in our case, the church. I'm going to maybe drop in some money in the offering plate, maybe sit there and nod or sing a hymn or something like that, smile, do my time, walk out of here, and that's good. And when I get home or maybe at the end of the service, I am going to ask God to bless me and give me whatever it is I wanted. There are people that show up in churches, and I've dealt with them for years, people that show up in churches that want their marriages fixed because they came to church. And what they did in the Old Testament times or in Jesus' time is they would come to this altar, they would present an animal sacrifice and walk out and act as if God owed them something because they had worshiped God, and then they would go out and they would treat their fellow man like garbage. It's Christianity today, isn't it? And Jesus comes along and says, we're not having any more of that. He says, I'm going to give you a command. The new command is that you love other people. And what he was saying there is devotion to God is measured in terms of devotion to others. And he says, stop living for yourself and what you can get. It's not going to be measured that way. You're going to be measured by what you do for your fellow man. And that's so important. Jesus said, if you want God's attention in your life, then pay attention to how you treat other people. Because every person is made in the image of God. And people matter to God, so people should matter to you. And you can't go to church on Sunday, do some routine, sing a few songs, sit there and smile and walk out the door and win favor with God, because God is more interested in how you treat the person that you cut off in your car, the person that you called an idiot, the person that you disrespected at your work because they didn't agree with you. See, devotion to God is measured in terms of your devotion to other people. Love for God is equated to love for others. And that was such a new, radical way to change things. And Jesus consequently modeled it. And what Jesus would do is he didn't just go around and feel compassion. Jesus would act compassionately. That's what he's called us to do. The second thing that Jesus taught was this, that people have inherent, not ascribed value. And this is so important. This is revolutionary too, and you may not even understand those words, but let me help you with it. Back in Bible times, and it still works today, but back in Bible times, in fact, there are several stories in the New Testament we're not going to look into today, but Jesus was dealing with people who had money. In fact, there was one time a young man who comes who has great riches and asks Jesus about inheriting eternal life. And he comes to the conclusion that he's done all these good things that should earn God's favor. And Jesus says, hey, there's this one thing you still need to do. You need to go out and take all you have and sell it and give it to the poor. And the man walks away, this young man walks away because Jesus, it says that he had great riches. He had great valuables. He didn't want to do that. And when he gets done with the story, his disciples are in such shock. Can't believe this. Because basically Jesus is saying, hey, what's keeping you from heaven, what's keeping you from salvation, what's keeping you from God is your stuff. And they didn't understand that because they had this belief that a lot of people believe today, that the more you have in life, the more God likes you. We use the term blessed. But it's funny how we talk about blessed. Because when we talk about somebody being blessed, we never equate it with things that are negative, right? We'll say, hey, I was blessed because somebody gave me. I was blessed because I got this. I was blessed because I got that. But do we ever talk about I was blessed because I have cancer? I think that's the point, isn't it? I was blessed because I had a broken leg. I was blessed. See, God blesses us with those things. He might even bless us, but not giving us a job we want. And that's tough. Those are hard things. I get it. But see, society has taught us, and it's the same thing that's carried on for at least 1,000 or 2,000 years since Jesus is around. They believe that if you had stuff. In fact, Jesus, at the end of this discussion of this young man, he tells the disciples, he says, it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter into the kingdom of heaven. and they're surprised, and they stop, and that truth rattled them, but their mindset was wrong, and he helps correct their mindset, and they ask him, who then could make it into heaven? Because those are the most blessed people. Those are the people that God likes the best. And isn't that how we feel in America? Hey, I was born to be America. God bless the USA. And you know how insulting that is to the rest of the world when we say that? That God loves us and he doesn't love you. Because you Muslims, you Buddhists, your countries are no good. God blesses us. You know why he blesses us? Because we have more stuff. That's what we equate it to. That's what we've been taught. And Jesus comes along and says, no. People have inherent value, not ascribed value. See, inherent value is something that's born in you. And it's born in you because you are made in the image of God. That's what Jesus taught people. And see, it's something that's driven Christianity. And see, for generations of Christianity, what we've seen is that Christians who have followed the model of Jesus and done what Jesus done, you know what they did? They did things that are crazy. They created hospitals. And they didn't just create hospitals for Christians, you know that. They made hospitals for all people. Isn't that great? You know why? Because all people God died for. He didn't die just for us that are sitting here today. He died for the godly and the ungodly. He died for the saint and the sinner, because we all were sinners and are sinners. And that's just the truth. See, Christians have gone through time since Jesus has been around. They followed his model and they've done things that are crazy. They built shelters, not just for Christians, but for all people. They built orphanages, not just for Christian orphans, but for all orphans. They built all these different things. Hey, you know who came up with schools? Guess who? It was Christians, and it wasn't just for Christian people. In fact, the whole Christian school movement, and I've been part of that, so I have to confess this in here, the whole Christian school movement is a racist movement. If you didn't know that, Christian schools were started because they didn't want their kids hanging out with black kids during the desegregation time. It's historically true. I hate those facts, but they're true. Christians made schools. In fact, the first schools actually happened in churches in America. But Christians made schools for all kids, not just for Christian kids. And why? Because Jesus knew and he taught that people have inherited, not ascribed value. You don't get things, you don't get things because you are born a certain way. See, and what drives this deep down, and here's what's great about this. This is why, when you answer that question, what breaks your heart? What breaks your heart about the needs of humanity? What breaks your heart about human rights that are being violated? What breaks your heart about families and children? You know what that is? That's God stirring your heart. Really, what you feel about what breaks your heart is really a reflection of what God feels and is placed in your heart to break your heart. Nehemiah's heart was broken. It was by divine design. And that's so important you understand that. Nehemiah's broken heart in Nehemiah, back in Nehemiah chapter 1, was divine design. You see, I said this morning in our Sunday school class. History, we believe history to be linear. And when I say that, is that God has piggybacked events after events after events after events to bring about his purpose, his design, his plan. And that's what we understand as Christ followers. And what Nehemiah didn't know, as we've read through chapter 1 and you've seen all of Nehemiah's heart, and his heart was broken, but what he didn't know is that when God stirred his heart for the city of Jerusalem, the people there, to help rebuild that wall, Jerusalem back in order, it was part of a sequence of events that had started way before him and would go on way after him. He was playing a critical role in this plan, but he had no idea, and this is so important, listen carefully, he had no idea what actually hung in the balance of his decision to answer the question, what breaks my heart? You see, about 70 years before Nehemiah's heart was broken, God broke the heart of a guy named Zerubbabel. That's a fun name to say, right? And Zerubbabel went back to Jerusalem, and he began to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem so they'd have a place to worship, the center and the heart of the people. And about 14 years before Nehemiah's heart was broken by God for what he heard, he broke the heart of another guy, a guy who was a priest and a scribe, a guy named Ezra. And Ezra went back to Jerusalem to teach the people the law and to help rebuild the people's heart. And then God reached into Nehemiah's heart and he stirred his heart. And what's great about all three of those men is not one of them understood, not one of them had an idea that it was all in preparation for what would happen some 400 plus years down the road in the future when the last prophet, priest, and king would walk into the very city of Jerusalem, up into the temple steps, and he would declare himself to be the Messiah. See, God sent his son into the world to do for us what we could not do for ourselves, because my sin, your sin, our sin, it broke God's heart. Imagine if God had done what you do about what breaks your heart, and all he did was blame, and nothing ever changed. Where would you be today? The Bible tells us, for God so loved the world that he gave. He acted compassionately. By divine design, what broke his heart was our sin, so he sent his son. And in order for you to experience it, in order for you to face up to what breaks your heart, you're going to have to overcome and take on some risks this year. You're going to have to step out and do some things that most of your friends are going to think are crazy. Some of them think you're crazy for coming here on Sunday mornings. Imagine if you actually put more into it. Put some money into it. Put some time, some effort. They really think you're gone over the edge. So what breaks your heart? This New Year's, I think we should have some resolutions. Maybe you don't do the resolution thing because it's always been a problem for you, but this New Year's, I think we should have some resolutions. I think, hey, you know what? For almost all of us in this room, we probably almost all need to lose some weight. That's real. I'm serious. I think we all ought to get out of debt this year. But let me just say this. Your body and your budget are way too small of a thing to invest your entire life on. That's true. Your body and your balance sheet are too small of a thing to dedicate your entire life to, or at least your entire year. So answer the question, what breaks your heart? What breaks your heart? See, this is truly a New Year's resolution. It's not about you this year, though. Because here's what I know. If you really want to change and become a better person, if you want to really do something in this lifetime, this year, then you need to do something to make the world a better place. That's what breaks your heart. So this week, I want you to take that sheet of paper I gave you, a simple sheet of paper, to ask one question. Put it wherever you look the most. If it's a mirror, it's your car, in front of your TV. For most of us, it's our refrigerators. Put it there. And ask yourself, pray this prayer, God, reveal to me what breaks my heart. What breaks my heart? And what can I do about it in the weeks to come? Now, for some of you, you're freaking out like, I can't change the whole world. Hey, you know what? There's a lot of agencies out there that you can get involved in. Hey, you can't feed the whole world, but you know what? Hey, I know Samaritan's Purse has Operation Christmas Child. There's a way to get involved. Hey, some of you get involved, and that's great. There are all kinds of different things, but go and do something. Don't put it off on somebody else. Don't say, hey, the preacher needs to do this. No, you need to do it. What breaks your heart? I love the way this chapter ends. We haven't read the actual end of the chapter. There's one part I left out. Nehemiah chapter 1, verse number 11. Nehemiah ends his story of chapter 1 this way. He says this. And it's so puzzling, but it's so awesome when you understand what he's saying. He just says this. I was cupbearer to the king. And you know what he was saying? He's saying, you know what? I understand where I'm at in life. I understand my resources are limited. I'm a slave. I'm a servant. I understand where I'm at, but I also understand the opportunity I have. I understand what breaks my heart. This is the stewardship of influence that I have. This was who I am, and consequently, I took what he's saying here when he says this. I took who I am, and I did with what I had and who I am, and I addressed what broke my heart. So what breaks your heart today?